The Raising of Lazarus. Imagine receiving news that your closest friend is dying. You drop everything, you rush, you run. But what if someone told you, wait, not yet? What if the person who could save your friend chose to stay behind? That's exactly what happened in one of the most extraordinary stories ever recorded, a story that has baffled historians, moved theologians, and left millions of people asking one single question: is this even possible? Today, we're diving deep into the story of Lazarus of Bethany, a man who died, was buried for 4 days, and then walked out of his tomb alive. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or simply curious, I promise you this story is far more layered and fascinating than you might think. So let's get into it. Part 1. Who was Lazarus? To understand the miracle, we first need to understand the man and the world he lived in. Lazarus was a Jewish man living in Bethany, a small village on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, roughly 2 miles southeast of Jerusalem. In the ancient world, location mattered enormously. Bethany wasn't some backwater town. It sat along a major trade and pilgrimage route into the Holy City. People knew Bethany. People passed through Bethany. Lazarus lived there with his 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. These weren't strangers to the man at the center of this story, Jesus of Nazareth. The Gospel of John, our primary source for this account, tells us explicitly, "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus." That's a striking detail. In a gospel that rarely slows down for personal sentiments, the author pauses to say these 3 people held a special place in Jesus' heart. Mary, in particular, is described elsewhere in the Gospels as the woman who sat at Jesus' feet listening to his teaching, while Martha busied herself with household duties. She's also identified as the woman who anointed Jesus' feet with expensive perfume and wiped them with her hair, an act so significant it was recorded in multiple Gospel accounts. So this wasn't a distant acquaintance, this was family, this was the inner circle. And yet, when Lazarus falls gravely ill, something unexpected happens. Part 2. The delay. Mary and Martha send a message to Jesus. The message is simple, heartfelt, and direct. "Lord, the one you love is sick." They don't beg, they don't demand, they trust that simply telling him will be enough, that Jesus will come. And here is where the story takes its first unexpected turn. Jesus doesn't come, not immediately. In fact, after receiving this news, the Gospel of John records that Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. 2 more days. His close friend is dying, his friends are grieving, and Jesus waits. This has puzzled readers for 2,000 years. It seems cold, it seems almost cruel. How could someone who loved these people stand by while Lazarus suffered? But the text gives us a clue. Jesus says to his disciples, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." He wasn't being indifferent. He was operating on a timeline that others couldn't yet see. Still, it gets more complicated. When Jesus finally announces that it's time to go to Judea, where Bethany is located, his disciples push back, hard. Because the last time Jesus was in that region, the religious leaders had tried to stone him. Going back felt like walking into a trap. Jesus responds with a kind of calm that borders on the mysterious. He speaks in metaphors about walking in daylight and darkness. And then he says plainly, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." The disciples take this literally. They say, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." They're relieved. Sleep is good. Sleep means recovery. Jesus then clarifies, without softening it, Lazarus is dead. And then he adds something striking. "For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe." For your sake, for your belief, there's a purpose to this delay. He's not running from grief. He's running toward something greater. One of the disciples, Thomas, the one history has labeled the doubter, speaks up at this moment with a kind of dark fatalism. "Let us also go, that we may die with him." It's a bleak statement, but it tells us something important. The disciples understood the danger. They were walking into enemy territory. For them, this journey felt like it might end in death. Part 3. The Arrival. By the time Jesus arrives in Bethany, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days. This detail is not incidental. In first-century Jewish thought, there was a widespread belief, recorded in later rabbinic literature, that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days after death. After 3 days, decomposition would have been visible, and it was believed the soul finally departed. 4 days meant there was no ambiguity, no loophole, no hope. Lazarus wasn't mostly dead. He wasn't in a coma. He wasn't sleeping. He was 4 days dead. Martha hears that Jesus is approaching and runs out to meet him before he even enters the village. This is classic Martha, active, direct. She doesn't wait. And what she says to him is both a statement of faith and a whisper of grief. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Hear the weight in those words. If you had been here. The implied question underneath. Why weren't you here? You could have prevented this. You chose not to. Why? And yet she doesn't stop there. She continues, "But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Even now, after 4 days, she still holds on to something. Jesus says to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha nods. She understands this. She's heard the teachings about resurrection at the end of days. "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." It's a theological fact she can hold on to. Distant comfort, future hope. But Jesus corrects the frame entirely. He doesn't say, "Yes, one day." He says something that stopped people in their tracks then and still does now. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" It's one of the most audacious statements in all of religious literature. He's not just offering hope, he's claiming to be the source of life itself. The resurrection isn't an event in the future, it's a person standing right in front of her. Martha's response is a confession of faith. "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." Then Martha goes back and quietly pulls her sister aside. "The teacher is here and is asking for you." When Mary hears this, she gets up quickly and goes to him. When the people in the house who had been mourning see her rush out, they follow her, assuming she's going to the tomb to weep. Mary falls at Jesus' feet when she sees him, and she says the same words as her sister, almost word for word. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Same words, same grief, the same question the whole family had been turning over for 4 days. Part 4. The Tears. And now we come to what is arguably the most famous verse in the entire Bible, certainly one of the most discussed. When Jesus sees Mary weeping and the people who came with her also weeping, the text says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. He asks, "Where have you laid him?" They say, "Come and see, Lord." And then 2 words that have been pondered, preached, and written about for millennia. Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible, and possibly the most powerful. Why did he weep? He knew what was about to happen. He knew Lazarus would walk out of that tomb. He had chosen this moment deliberately. Why weep if you already know the ending? This question has produced centuries of reflection. Some theologians say he wept in solidarity, not because he didn't know the outcome, but because he entered fully into the pain of those around him.
Grief isn't irrational just because you know it will end. A parent weeps at a child's suffering, even knowing the fever will break. Others point to the Greek word used here, embrimomai, which appears when he is deeply moved. This word has a connotation not just of sorrow, but of anger, righteous anger. Some scholars suggest Jesus was weeping not just in grief, but in fury at death itself, fury at what sin and suffering and mortality had done to his creation. The people watching see the tears and say, "See how he loved him." But others in the crowd voice the same cynicism you might hear today. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? It's a fair question, and the answer, as they are about to discover, is yes, and more.
Part 5. The Miracle. They come to the tomb. It is a cave with a stone rolled against the entrance, a common burial style in 1st century Judea. Jesus says, "Take away the stone." Martha objects immediately. Practical, grounded Martha. She says, "But Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." In other words, it's too late. The body has decomposed. Opening that tomb won't bring him back. It will just expose everyone to the smell of death. Jesus turns to her. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" They take away the stone. What happens next, Jesus does publicly, deliberately, loudly. He doesn't whisper a prayer. He doesn't perform some private ritual. He looks up and prays out loud. And notably, he says he's praying out loud specifically so the crowd standing there will hear it. This is not a private miracle. This is a demonstration. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And then he calls out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And Lazarus comes out. He's still wrapped in burial cloths, strips of linen around his body, a cloth around his face. He shuffles out of the darkness, bound into the light. Jesus says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." That's it. No dramatic flourish, no extended ceremony. A dead man walks out of his tomb, and Jesus tells the people nearby to unwrap him. The reaction in the crowd is split. Many of the Jews who had come to mourn, who saw what happened, believed, but some went directly to the Pharisees and reported what Jesus had done. This moment, the resurrection of Lazarus, triggers a chain reaction. The religious authorities convene an emergency council. The high priest Caiaphas speaks the words that would seal Jesus' fate. "It is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." From that day on, the text tells us, they plotted to take Jesus' life. One resurrection leads directly to the planning of another death.
Part 6. What happened to Lazarus after? Here's a question that most people never think to ask. What happened to Lazarus after he walked out of that tomb? The Gospel of John gives us one more glimpse. 6 days before Passover, Jesus returns to Bethany. There's a dinner. Martha is serving. Mary anoints Jesus' feet. And Lazarus is simply there, at the table, eating. Can you imagine the surreal nature of that dinner? The man who was dead 4 days ago, sitting and sharing a meal. We're told that a large crowd of Jews came, not just to see Jesus, but specifically to see Lazarus. He had become living proof. And the text tells us that the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. They wanted to kill the evidence. After that, Lazarus disappears from the biblical record. Early church tradition, particularly in Eastern Christianity and some accounts preserved in later writings, suggests that Lazarus eventually fled persecution and made his way to Cyprus, where he became the first bishop of Kition, modern-day Larnaca. He is said to have lived another 30 years after his resurrection, dying peacefully around 63 AD. The Cathedral of St. Lazarus in Larnaca, Cyprus, is built over what is claimed to be his tomb, discovered in 890 AD with an inscription reading, "Lazarus, the friend of Christ." His relics were later partially moved to Constantinople and then to Marseille, France, where a separate tradition holds that he, Mary Magdalene, and Martha arrived by boat and evangelized southern France. We can't verify these traditions with certainty, but what's striking is that across multiple cultures, multiple continents, and multiple centuries, someone named Lazarus left an extraordinary footprint.
Part 7. Why this story still matters. So why does this story matter? Why, 2,000 years later, are people still talking about a man named Lazarus? Partly because of what it claims. If it happened, it's the most significant event of its kind in recorded history. A man dead 4 days, in a verifiable state of decomposition, restored to full life. That's not a near-death experience. That's not spontaneous resuscitation. That's something that doesn't fit neatly into any natural category. But even for those who approach this story skeptically, there's something undeniably human at its core. The grief of the sisters, the two-word sentence that has outlasted empires, the crowd divided between wonder and suspicion, the authorities who saw the miracle and immediately thought, how do we contain this? These are not ancient problems. These are permanent human responses to anything that disrupts the expected order of things. The Raising of Lazarus is also a story about love that refuses to be neat and tidy. Jesus could have arrived on time. He chose not to. The sisters were hurt by that, and yet something larger came out of that hurt, something none of them could have orchestrated on their own. There's a quiet invitation embedded in this story. What if the delay in your life isn't indifference, but preparation?